Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the fall program year. Welcome back me. I've been gone for 4 months. By the way, this was my first, I'd seen it before, but my first Sunday on the new Swan Garden. It is so much better than before. I'm really glad that was done. I was checking in every day, same thing with the parking lot. So well done, everybody that was gone. Aaron and I are very excited this year to talk about the book of Exodus. How many of you, don't lie, you're in church, how many of you have read the whole book ahead of time? Excellent. Aaron, would you offer a prayer for us?
The blessing over study. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We thank you, God, for providing us texts of deep meaning, encouraging us to immerse ourselves within. Amen.
So, brief overall summary. Remember, we talked about Genesis, and those 50 chapters, the first 11 tell cosmic history, and then the next 12 through 50 talk about the history of the people that became Israel. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, all of them, and the story ends. Where does it end? What area of the world? Anybody recall? Egypt. Why are they in Egypt? Do we need to do Genesis all over again? They're in Egypt, so there's this guy, Joseph, and his brothers were envious and jealous of his relationship with his parents, and why is he always mom and dad's favorite, and look at the cool coat he gets, and he got the car and the good college, and we got nothing but hand-me-downs, and I hate that guy. And then they go to kill him, and then they realize that's probably a little too far. Let's just do what with him, Aaron?
Sell him into slavery.
Sell him into slavery. Not quite as bad as killing him. And Joseph ends up in the land of Egypt, and he's a slave. And the king starts having the Pharaoh, these crazy dreams. What do I do? What does this mean? And some serving girl realizes, hey, because if you're really this low on the ladder and you know something that can help somebody really high up the ladder and you're smart, you tell them, I know this guy who can interpret dreams. And gets Joseph, and he comes and explains, is this the skinny fat cows? There are going to be 7 skinny cows and 7 fat cows. Anybody remember what they represent? 7 years of good years, 7 years of famine. So Pharaoh, you better stock up and save all the grain. And that's what he does. And then it turns out that Joseph is a really shrewd businessman. He gets put in charge of everything. So he's kind of like the prime minister. And he makes loads of money. And here's a little thing I forgot. Why is everybody in Egypt a slave? Why are all the Israelites slaves? And everybody else for that matter? Is it fair to say Joseph did it? Masterminded it. Pretty good guy, but also pretty bad guy. There are no pure good or evil people in the Bible. They're always a mix. So Joseph is God's favorite and the son, and he devises this scheme. So it's really, you're starving the first year. Well, you can sell all your stuff to me, and then I'll give you some food. And the second year you come back, oh, my kids are so hungry, would you please help? Sure, give me all your houses and your land. All right. And then year 3 and 4, give me all your cattle, give me all your stuff, your stocks, your bonds. And now finally, I need something to eat. Well, you can be a slave, an indentured servant. And eventually, everybody in Egypt was a slave to Pharaoh because he had all the food, all the means of production. That's why everybody is enslaved, Israelites included. And so all the people are feeling this, and the Israelites are the foreigners, And so if something bad goes on, and I want you never ever to think for 1 second that anything that happens in biblical times has current, contemporary analogies that are going on. Imagine if you had all these foreigners invading your border. This would have been the northeast border, and they keep coming and coming, and there's so many of them, and nobody knows what to do, and the people there get agitated and then scared, and then they start responding, and then you get, well, you need to do this, and you need stronger borders, and you need to welcome these people. It's the same thing, different circumstances, but a similar thing is happening. So we see some of what occurs there. Now, all that's occurred in the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus. And so this is, you think of it, it's the sequel. I'm kind of thinking, it's not Godfather 1, Godfather 2. This is, something happens in Genesis, and then this is the same people, the next part of the story. And it reveals several themes. Who God is. And something I'm going to do over and over by design is say the name of God given in the story, and that's Yahweh. Sometimes it's translated Jehovah in Old King James. Yahweh, and so one of the most important things for us to think about as we look at Exodus together is the God described, self-revealed in Exodus, who we think of when we say God. Because God, I would contend that we think of, there's an old joke, oh, is he the God of the Old Testament today or the God of the New Testament? And if you get a slight smile to that, you know there's a subtle difference of stereotypical, well, it's the agitated, jealous dude or the really loving, kind, goes after one sheep when 99 are lost. But it's the same God. Or is it also we've layered on all this Greek thought and Roman thought and other things about who God is and have this amalgamation? But let the story speak for itself of how God, Yahweh, reveals the divine self in the story. It doesn't add up to what the people think God ought to be, nor I would say what we think. Shouldn't God be nicer, Aaron? Arguably, on our terms. It's very clear God is on God's terms, not ours. And that if you saw the Exodus reading, it's today's Old Testament, God's really cross, is going to wipe everybody out, and hey, come on, let's make a deal and don't, and then God changes his mind. Is it that one, or is it something else? So that theme of who God is, guidance, covenant, justice, mercy, all of that is there. And we call this book Exodus. What does that mean? Departure, leaving. But what is it called in Hebrew?
Shemot.
Shemot.
It means names. The books of the Bible, certainly the books of the Torah, in Hebrew take their name from the first significant word in that text. So it says these are the names, and so the word for names is Shemot, and so that becomes the title of the book. It's just to distinguish it from the other books, right? Whereas Exodus is Latin, is the English way of saying it, and describes the main action. Genesis is the same story, which with regard to the nomenclature, right? We call it Genesis because we know that Genesis means beginnings, but in Hebrew the word is Bereshit, which is the first word of the book, or the first word of the Torah. So that's how it got named.
So who are the names? Why does that matter? Who are they? Sons of Jacob. Israel. Hey, this is a continuation. And that same line appears in the latter part of Genesis. So it's very much meant to be, this is the next part of the story. So another way to think of that, in the Jewish mind, in Hebrew, who the story is about. In the Western American mind, we say, what is it about? And these are the names, the sons of Israel, or is it the Exodus? Both of them are ideas are ultimately about God, but it's a different way of accessing what the story is ultimately about, who it's for, all those things. So there are several parts I should probably omit, but I'm just going to say them. In Exodus, the people of Israel are called the Israelites, They later become, they're sometimes called the Hebrews and later still called the Jews. And they get to connect. First of all, God reveals God's self to them, himself, herself, whatever. But by the way, if patriarchal images upset you, think of something else. That's what the biblical story uses, but don't let that be a hiccup in any way. If it's himself or herself or God's self or itself, doesn't matter. Just focus on what the story's trying to say. So all these things about priesthood and temple and the whole foundations of Judaism are being laid. And in Exodus, the people of Israel are given birth. They become Judah, Israel, in this action, in this story. And what's the very first thing they do after they get to be Israelites, Jews, set free from slavery in Egypt? What's the very first thing they do? Celebrate, make offerings to this wonderful Yahweh God. Go out and do everything you do. Like, I'm on sabbatical. I'm going to do everything I wanted to do. I slept, as it turns out, and drove race cars. But what did the Jews do?
Complain.
They complained. Aaron, do Jews ever complain today?
No longer.
No longer. And we get that from Christians, never complain about anything either. Is it too hot, too cold, the service too long, is a hymn? Nope, never complain. So it's the first thing they do. So if you do complain, do not say you have biblical precedent. I will disagree with that. So Israel's promise of obedience, like here's Yahweh says, you must do these things and then I will be in a relationship with you. They complain and then they go into massive disobedience. That's just the nature of things. So if you have, you try to meet your diet goals or your this, that, not meeting the target is, again, biblical precedent in there. Think of this, you could say it's a work of relationship, but it's primarily a work of theology, who God is. It's arranged, if you're interested in these things, in 40 chapters. Were the chapters there at the beginning, Aaron? No. When do they appear? Much later?
Much later. We refer to it as the Masoretic text. The Masoretes organized the volume of these stories and number them such that we have chapters and verses, right? And that organizational process was maybe 1,000 years ago.
About 1,000 years ago. You might think of it as, if you're ever watching a video on YouTube or on your television, that it's just one long story, but you'll notice it'll sometimes break it down in chapters. Here's this, this, and this with timestamps. That's effectively what chapter and verses are. They're a much later addition for convenience to look up something. They were not in the original story. Originally, it's just one long story. Now, it's fair to say, Aaron, in space-time, did all these events take place as described in the book of Exodus? Maybe, maybe not necessarily.
We don't read it as a history text, right? We're not. There are things there that still remain, geographical locations and the rest, but we don't have outside corroborating texts to explain to verify the story. So it sort of exists in a vacuum, and the veracity of it or the historicity of it is not confirmed, right? It's true because it happens again and again. Or it's true because of the messages within it, the theology within it. But we're not reading it as an historical record, per se.
So maybe it happened, maybe it didn't, but I think if one is caught up on that, too, it's a stumbling block. You miss the point and most of the good that's in there. So, if I can. Yeah.
If you think about a memory you have of an event in your life, is it true? Is it happened the way you recall it? Well, maybe it did and maybe it didn't. Yes, memory is like that. But insofar as you remember it, it obviously has some meaning for you. There's a purpose for remembering it. Otherwise, our brains would release it, right? So what that meaning is, well, that will be determined, and maybe it changes over time. So when we talk about our own memories, we behave as if they're true. They're meaningful for us, but they're not necessarily the historical record of what took place. Yes?
Here's another way to think about it, kind of the meta, the highest level. How did the Jews become the Jews?
Well,
This is the story that explains that. A professor of mine in college used to talk about every religion, and you could say country for that matter, family has something that is sometimes called the root experience, the defining, birthing story. And for Jews, the Exodus, and that's a shorthand for all the things. We were slaves, we were delivered from slavery, we got the 10 Commandments, we escaped, we went to the Promised Land. All of that is Exodus. And that's what made the Jews who they are. And for Christians, what is our analogous parallel story that makes us Christians, not Jews, not Muslims? The crucifixion, resurrection. And then all the stuff around that, that's the defining series of events that give birth to who we are. And there are lots, you could say that about your own family. I would say with Natalie, well, how we met, and then these other significant events. It's not one little story, it's a meta-narrative is sometimes used, the big arching story that explains everything else, and then the little pieces. So did all of this happen, how I met Natalie? This, by the way, is our wedding anniversary, so it's on my mind. Is this exactly how it happened? Or in time, did I get more wonderful back 30 years ago? I think I tell it like I was smarter and nicer and better looking 30 years ago than I really was. But that's how we look back on things. And then we remember certain parts of the story that give kind of depth and nuance and some color to it. And so a lot of all that is in there. Roughly the first half of the book is about the theme of rescue, saving, delivering from slavery. And the second half roughly is about the response to being rescued, which is, so God acts, the people react. That's over and over throughout this entire book. It's two sides of a coin. Again, I want to emphasize how we think of God and God's self-revelation to us. Over and over, is this the God you thought existed, or is it something else? Is it the same in the old and new? Fun fact, I didn't know Exodus is cited more times in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, than any other book of the Bible. Did you know that?
I did, not until I read your notes.
Not till he read my notes. I feel pretty clever. So Exodus is the story that other Jewish texts reference to tell us who we are, explain what they mean. After two other Old Testament books appear more times quoted or paraphrased, referenced in the New Testament. Anybody get? So Exodus is third. Anybody guess what the other two would be? Isaiah, well done. Psalms, because of references to worship and references to the Messiah. That's why Isaiah, which is full of them, and Psalms, and then Exodus, which again it tells us who we are. So, chapter 1, we got there quicker than I was thinking. We get there, let me add too, we use in church, what translation of the Bible? New Revised Standard Version. So generally that's what Lutherans, Methodists, Episcopalians would use. It's really good in some areas. In other areas, particularly in Exodus, in my opinion, it's not so great. It misses a lot of the nuance of the Hebrew. And so thankfully we have a teacher of Hebrew and Torah, and we are totally getting our money's worth out of this to help with that. So again, called, and these are the names. What's the first word of the book? You have the printout of the reading? What's it say? And these are the names? Why and? Did your English teacher tell you to start a sentence with and? Isn't that weird? Why and?
This version does.
I know, it's terrible. That's why I just said that. And the Hebrew version is and. Why and? Part 2. And we miss that in this translation. And these are the names of all those sons of Israel. Again, a direct quote from Genesis, the last book, to make the link, the connection between the two, really explicit so you cannot miss it. But our translation dropped the ball and missed it. And is not there by accident, it's the connector, the linker. The promises made by Yahweh God to Jacob and his descendants, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, here they are lived out. Here's that happening. Before it's just a promise, here's the promise made real. What happened in the book of Genesis? I talked all about the Jacob stuff. But then we read what? What does it say in this first few chapters, or first paragraph?
They all died.
They all died. So Jacob died, and all the people that knew Jacob died. And the benefit you would get from knowing the Pharaoh, the guy in charge, and helping him out with his dreams and saving the country, that's yesterday's news cycle. Heck, that's last month's news cycle. Nobody remembers that anymore. And the Pharaoh died, and everybody that was connected, it's very clear, everybody's gone. But you still got the results, the consequences of Joseph and all his people being there. And that's where you start to get the grumblings go on. There we go. I'm not going to read you all these names, but now a key, chapter 1, verse 8. But the Israelites were fruitful and prolific. And they multiplied and grew exceedingly strong so that the land was filled with them. I'm going to get to how that could be translated better too. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase and in the event of war join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. We threaten them with holding back trade deals or having tariffs, or we will bomb you, or don't be allies. How dare you, China and Russia and India unite because you're supposed to do what we tell you. Or how dare you you're not doing what we want you to do. So they got afraid. So they set taskmasters. They punished them. They didn't incentivize them to be on their team. They just went negative rather than positive. Here's a bunch of foreign aid, or no, we'll bomb you. Those are the two choices you have. I'm not being particular to any country at all. So therefore they set taskmasters over to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramses, for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard service and mortar and brick and every kind of field labor. Did they build the pyramids for them? Never says that. It's sometimes, like I've seen in popular culture, that's not what it says at all. They were ruthless. It keeps saying ruthless, shrewd, punishing. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. You want to jump in anything?
I will.
How many people showed up in his first 5 were born to Jacob? Did you notice that really subtle line?
70.
Why 70? Just a big number? What does 40 mean in the Jewish mind?
A span of time of significance. So 40 days, 40 nights, 40 years, right? Multiples of 40. That was a number that referenced many moons.
Yeah, a while. That's what 40 means. Jesus was in the wilderness 40 days and 40 nights, a long while to be really, really hungry. 70 means something else. What does 70 mean? How's your numerology with 7 and 10?
Yeah. So the 7 was a significant number. We get 7 days of the week. There's nothing about the calendar, or more accurately, so much of our calendar is based on the celestial patterns. Yes? Whether it's the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun, the phases of the moon, right? Other astronomical realities. But the 7-day week doesn't follow that. You can't look in the sky and know what day of the week it is. Yes? But 7 is not an accident. That was a number of significance also. It suggested completion or wholeness, or I don't know, I haven't gone on a deep dive.
Perfection.
Perfection, but so multiples of also took on significance.
10 also in Jewish mind represents completion, like the 10 Commandments. So you put 7 and 10 together, and it's we might say in America, well, that's kind of wacky, conspiratorial, but not if you think that way. This is wholeness and perfection and wholeness together, and that 70 represents all the nations of the world. There are lots of times 70 appears. All the elders, how many people are in the Sanhedrin, the Jewish legal body? 70. It represents everybody in the world, that idea, that number of the Septuagint, the 70, that's where that comes from. So that's not an accident that there were 70 listed there. So
we should just say, we do the same kind of thing, don't we? We have idiomatic ways of referencing time or thinking about expressing longevity, right? Something will last for 1,000 years. Well, in the human conception, 1,000 years is a long time. It suggests it will outlast you and your children and your grandchildren 1,000 years. Or when we say once upon a time, sort of looking back, we're not looking at a date specific, but we're saying that this story was novel at one point, right? It happened, it took place, and we sort of we move in those ways, right? Are there others I'm trying to think of that we may just sort of idiomatically make reference to spans of time? I don't know exactly what might come to mind, but that's how it works, right?
So these Israelites, 1:7, were fruitful and prolific. Let me offer a better translation to get to the more Hebrew, you could fair to say, is more guttural, more earthy than English is for sure, and also in Greek. But the sons of Israel were fertile, so they became a teeming swarm. Indeed, they became so many, they were a strength to be reckoned with by their numbers alone. The land was simply filled by them. It's almost like suggesting a locust. Or later, when the plagues show up of frogs and gnats, and they're oh my God, we're lousy with Israelites running around. They're everywhere. There are more of them than us, and they're eating up all of our stuff. Now, imagine if you lived in the place and things were relatively settled, and all these foreigners showed up, and they started taking your jobs. You know, a little is okay. Trickle is okay. They took your jobs, and they started intermarrying with your people. That's a whole nother reason to be upset about things. Then they were taking up hospital beds, and they were on the government, they were on the dole, and all these things, people start to react in different ways. If it's just the one nice guy that everybody knows, no, this is a threat. And so that's very clear what this keeps pushing. This is teeming. All the old reasons they were on our side, now we're scared of them. So two simultaneous events the story is leading us to. Steve, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, it's actually, the way I see it, it's a little different from what you said though, because what the Pharaoh says is these other people are more numerous than we are.
Mm-hmm.
But he never said they did anything wrong yet.
No.
Then he says, if there's a war, if we end up with enemies, they might join with them. He's making up a straw man to oppress the Jews. As far as it says here, he's just scared because there's more of them. But he doesn't say they did this to me, they did this to me. What he's saying is, if this happens, it might be a problem.
I agree with you. But Pharaoh, the king who owns everybody and everything, is less threatened than the average person that would take all those things. I think you're exactly right, and he's pointing, you raise an interesting point also that I hadn't thought of, but it's obvious now. Have the Jews ever been blamed for anything they didn't actually do as a scapegoat? I mean, once or twice.
Pick your point in history.
Pick your point in history. Yes. And so this is a really good, it's not the first example, I guess. I never thought of it that way.
Or anti-Jew? No, maybe it's the first.
I'm sure there are lots more anti-Semitic things that happened before this, but told in story form, we got to be worried about these people, even though they haven't done anything. But they're going to. They could. And the threat, it seems to me, and again, I want to make sure that I'm not partisan, even though I'm holding up I'm partisan for the Steelers today. One should never be partisan as a clergy person, but it is reasonable to bring up connections. If you blame or worry or are afraid of some external threat, it helps you, if you're Pharaoh, all those Jews are going to do something really horrible, we should worry about them. It makes whatever internal domestic thing little less problematic because, the Jews are going to, who knows what could happen. There are more of them than us. That could be going on, but it's getting the people riled up about something. Jeff?
And also the text emphasizes their dynamism. He's a pharaoh. He's supposed to be the one that makes everything shake.
Yeah. Why would you worry about some slave people that are foreigners that don't have anything other than sheer numbers? But again, it's setting up the dynamic of the story. So, two simultaneous events are happening that are about to collide. The first is the Hebrews keep multiplying, and one can imagine easily the local population is getting older and grayer, and they're not producing as many babies. And this other new population keeps coming in and having more and more, and you just do the math, and you start to get scared. If you're Pharaoh, what's going to happen here? The new party, the second was not only new king, but note it's a new dynasty. That old dynasty has nothing to do with the new Pharaoh. Am I correct on this? And so let's just say if you're party A, and you've been in charge for, 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, and party B comes in, party A is stupid, terrible, no good. They're responsible for all the problems in our country and those other people. And so some of that may be going on. And so they want to get rid of any connection to the old good that happened. That new dynasty is not interested in the old dynasty's success. They are not in the Jews are in absolutely the wrong place to have all this go. But who's the one that's on their side that's not on Pharaoh's side? God. That's the whole point. It's setting up an impossible situation that they can't possibly manage on their own.
Can I say that we're sort of toggling back and forth without identifying it. On the one hand, we're discussing the book of Exodus as a political or economic treatise, right? We could use economic theory to describe a growing population. We know what happens to wages when there's an influx of folks who will work for below the minimum, right? That's part of the challenge, or part of the rhetoric around immigration is that it brings wages down, right? That kind of thing, that when the slaves leave Egypt, what happens to the economy back under Pharaonic rule, what the Pharaoh is concerned about. We can read this as a political or economic text, and we know that we're approaching the text first and foremost as a religious text, or as a theological text, or a morality tale, such that the God of Israel, whom we think of as God, does battle with the Pharaoh, the Egyptian gods, and the rest. And so we're moving back and forth, which is part of why this text becomes the Exodus story becomes so resonant. For the Jews, it's the story of leaving slavery and entering into covenant with God. In a Christian context, perhaps it's through the resurrection. We're still talking about leaving something that's very difficult, very physically based, slave labor, for instance, for a promised land or for redemption. If you look on the back, they don't have a dollar bill in their pocket. If you look on the back of it, maybe you've noticed it before, there's a pyramid with the eye of God at the top, because that was the metaphor that the founding fathers used, the idea that this was the promised land. And the book of Exodus comes around. There's something called liberation theology, which is the idea that God hears the people who are oppressed, wherever they may be. And the story of Exodus becomes that tale that, again, gets played out once more. That's what makes this text true, whether or not it happened or not, because it's continued to be resonant. In much the same way as stories of sibling rivalry in Genesis, or parents and children, are timeless universal tales, because that's what gets repeated again and again. Does that make sense? Right? So we're looking at this text of Exodus describing a population, describing foreigners. Perhaps they're not going to be loyal to the Pharaoh if things go sideways. All those ideas are part of the background for why it is such that the Israelites leave that, or God hears us in our distress and slavery and takes us towards the promised land. That's the big overarching metaphor.
That's right. And so I believe what the story is doing is setting up this impossible situation. Only God can save them. There is no chance in the political realm. It's as bad as it gets, because the next section says, how does Pharaoh respond to this teeming number of Israelites? One, let's give them more hard work and try to do a PR campaign to say bad stuff. And then what's the very next section there? The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, fair one and fragrant one, by the way, when you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, she shall live. So option A, give them tons of hard work, tax the heck out of them. Option B, genocide. Those are the two ways he's going to deal with it. But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded, but they let the boys live. So this is ancient throwing of shade in the most brilliant way that I have ever encountered. It is the most subtle burn in the Bible, but it's easy to miss. The midwives said to Pharaoh, why have you done this? Why have you allowed the boys to live? So imagine the two Jewish midwives speaking to the mighty king, surrounded by his soldiers and gold and whatever else. And they say, well, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. The Hebrew women are vigorous and young and good looking, and they're working in the field, and they squat down and have the baby, and then they carry on. We can't even get there in time. And those old Egyptian cows, they're slow and they're not the same. And they're not very strong. And that's what they said, that's their reasoning. So it's this look at how awesome the young Israelite people are, men and women, and just how lazy they're, that you could speak to power in that way is absolutely marvelous. Again, burn. Is that meant to be funny?
Probably.
Probably? And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. The Pharaoh commanded all those people, and this is setting up the next big part of the story. Every boy that is born to the Hebrews, you shall throw into the Nile. Notice the Pharaoh commanded all the people. So no longer the midwives. If you see a Hebrew baby, a boy, throw it into the river, i.e. drown it, kill it. Let that be a sign that we are not having this. We're going to throw it into the Nile, by the way, is the lifeblood in every possible way of Egypt. Throw all the male babies so everybody's going to see as they take their boats by, this is what we do. We're not taking that anymore. So there ends chapter 1. Quite horrific. Work them to death or kill them. But we're afraid. And then, has the main character of the story entered at all? God's not there yet. It takes midway through the next chapter for that to happen. What would you like to add there?
What I want us to appreciate is that what Exodus sets up, whereas heretofore in Genesis we have stories of families, perhaps one line of family, Abraham's family, Isaac's family, Jacob's family, which leads us to Joseph and his brothers, which takes us down into Egypt. But in the course of the Exodus, of Moses going to Pharaoh, we haven't come across Moses just yet, Moses going to Pharaoh demanding, let my people go, the Israelites leave en masse. And that becomes the defining experience for the Jewish people collectively, such that from that point on, we speak of them as a nation or a people. Or they leave Egypt together, they arrive at Mount Sinai together, they're now going through these experiences and entering into a covenantal relationship with God, the entirety of the...
Are they a people yet?
They're becoming a people, not quite yet.
They're kind of loosely connected kinfolk, sharing a similar language and customs, but they're 12 different tribes. They're spread out all over the place. They're not all one group.
Right.
And this is the process by which they become that group. When you go through a hardship together, you get bonded in a way you wouldn't otherwise if you just, everything's okay. So this is, part of the story of that. How does this story strike you, just reading one chapter? Right off the bat, we got to kill everybody because, Allison?
It seems that this seems to be the way that people get rid of babies. Herod did the same thing in the beginning.
Herod, the king, in the Bible, New Testament, is afraid of an upcoming king that might supplant him, in this case Jesus, so let's wipe out all the infants, and just to be safe, let's go up to 2 years to get everybody. That is a threat to a dynasty.
And I think that's why Moses got put in the precious, because, they were killing all the babies.
That is what happens, in chapter 2. Steve?
Maybe my view is colored by current events, but I see this as pure unadulterated racism.
I think that's reasonable.
Look at those people. They're making more kids than we are. They might do something bad. We don't like them. Kill them.
And it doesn't say it directly yet, but it seems to suggest, and you mentioned the straw man argument, it's almost like suggesting all the things that people might be worried about. You really ought to be worried about all these things. That's there. Racism is certainly prevalent all throughout. Now you'll get almost the reverse of it. Like, does God say here's the land you're going to inherit, and it belongs to the Jebusites and Perizzites, and we're going to wipe them all out? What? It's going one direction to the other. That's absolutely true. Russ? That's correct. So Pharaoh's never given a name. It's king. Emperor is better, yeah. That's an excellent point.
That's fascinating.
But, yes, it's a symbol, Pharaoh, and what is he the symbol of? And think of the context. So who is the most powerful nation in the world today, at least over the last 25 years? You'd say the United States. There are other players. In that time, in that region, who was the sole superpower? Egypt. In terms of food, because of by the way, I'll say more about this next week. I did not realize that there are about 105 million people live in Egypt. 95% of them live within 5 miles of the Nile River on either side. Today, I'm sure they did that back in this time as well. So the Nile River is the lifeline. It's how people get around. It's food. It's irrigation. It is everything. And so this is the seat of the empire that's dominating everybody. And Pharaoh, the king of this, is worried about some little ragtag, not even a real proper tribe, group of foreigners, which are, by the way, up in the northeast corner, Goshen. If you look at a map of Egypt, it's the northeast section there. That's where they are. Not the most fertile land, yet they still continue to grow why in the world is that symbol concerned at all with this group of people? And then, who has the best gods? The Egyptians, all sorts of cool gods for everything. And who has the best army? The Egyptians. We'll see later about when they chase the Israelites with their mounted chariots pulled. They're the finest war machines of the time because of how they're made. And they have the state-of-the-art everything. So this empire is encountering this nobody group, yet God, Yahweh, is on their side. And so ultimately you could say theologically, I think, Aaron, yes, it's all about these contemporary issues as well, but ultimately this is setting up Yahweh versus the world empire. And those are clashing. Yeah. To a degree, yes. So Yahweh versus Pharaoh. Pharaoh is a god, not the god, is an important distinction. And one way this would be expressed is in the plagues. I forgot the name of the Hebrew name for the plagues. Do you remember? The mighty acts is how they're often translated too. Blood, water into blood, and gnats and boils, and eventually the Passover. The first few, when we get to the story, Aaron and Moses come and do this thing. One is super cool, throws down his staff and it turns into a snake. And the word, by the way, is also translated different places as Leviathan or sea monster. It's probably best translated as crocodile, which is a god within the, and specifically there on the Nile, it's crocodiles. Oh, that makes local contextual sense. You have a point, Daniel, from my... And so that gobbles up all the other ones. So the first few, Pharaoh or his sorcerers, whatever they're called, can mimic or copy what Moses and Aaron do, but then they can't anymore. So it's like, well, I can beat you here, and they match, but then they can't match them anymore. Daniel?
I was wondering if there's ever been any interpretation as to why it's such a specific genocide. I mean, specifically just newborn boys. Trying to shoot the population, actually, girls, and not wanting to like those older, maybe because they're working in the communities for dinners, but has there been any interpretation as to why it's specifically just?
I don't know. Daniel's question is why the specificity with regard to practicing this genocide by killing the newborn baby boys as opposed to girls or adults for that matter. If you were going to perpetuate a genocide, it seems a rather slow means of going about it. Yes, to only kill the baby boys. I don't know more about that. I will say, yeah, please.
I would say probably because he's afraid they would be fighters and
They might have become part of the army or might. Interesting. Okay. That these baby boys might grow up to be fighters, right? Would be a threat.
I just had a thought, seeing that the way people was explaining more kind of after this tradition that developed. My understanding is that in Judaism, if a child is born to a Jewish woman, that child is Jewish. So it just...
So it's an odd choice to kill the boys. Is that the point?
Well, no, just that if you really want to express Judaism, then obviously there might have been a tradition developed after this time, I'm sure. But,
Right, it developed after, but
yeah, if you're going to keep the girls alive, well, even if they marry a Jewish man, then the children are going to be considered Jewish.
well, so the matrilineal line, such that if your mother's Jewish, your Jewish is later, right? Such that you're right. If they had known of that tradition, such that if you're born to a Jewish woman, then you're Jewish. It would obviously make more sense then to kill all the Jewish baby girls, right? Yeah, so it's not clear why it was done that.
That's just obviously a thought today.
Right. Perhaps there's a parallel in this. Oh, please, go ahead.
So, it sounds like it's not just baby boys as part of the genocide, but also girls, because we're not in the tradition of the matrilineal line yet.
Yes.
That you have girls that marry your Egyptian boys, and thus create
Egyptian, more Egyptians.
more Egyptian population to outnumber the number of Israelites.
Very good. So perhaps in a time when it was a patrilineal line, the concern was being born of a Jewish father as opposed to a Jewish mother. So perhaps, right? What I was going to suggest, and this is why I say maybe there's a parallel, it's absolutely the case that if you go through the 10 plagues, each one of them is essentially a contest between the God of Israel, who brings about the plague, up against one of the pharaonic or Egyptian gods. So if the sun is worshipped as a god, well then darkness will cover the land, right? And if you have a god of agriculture or crops or fertility, then we'll put a blight on, right, or swarms of locusts who may have also been worshipped. The best explication of this that I know is in a book called Nothing Sacred by Douglas Rushkoff, who walks through how each of these plagues is essentially a contest between the God of Israel, the single God, versus each one of these other Egyptian deities in turn. And insofar as Pharaoh, in the land of where primogeniture, right, the firstborn son succeeds the father, that would be the threat. And if Pharaoh's a god, then his understanding of who follows or how that divinity is transmitted would be through the firstborn son. I mean, perhaps there's a parallel there. It's not crystal clear to me.
Good. Any last thoughts? I don't want to leave us with genocide here.
Help us out, Susie.
It is Yahweh versus the power of the world. That's what's happening.
It's Yahweh or the highway.
Yahweh or the highway, says Aaron. Thank you. On that note, appreciate it.